Welcome officially. This is our 8th proper lecture, but the 9th meeting. And I just wanted to share a cartoon with you at the beginning to set everybody in the Christmas spirit and the season spirit. A friend of mine sent it regarding, when his kid told him, like, Daddy, you are not wearing your mask properly. And he asked him, like, how do you know that? They got in their schools, they got instructions how to behave well so that Santa brings them gifts. And one of the things was that they should also tell their parents that they should wear masks properly. So interesting. Then my friend sent me this cartoon. Like, we'll start with everyone who refuses to wear a mask to get on the naughty list. So he says his kid is now like a COVID agent that's constantly monitoring him if he's wearing the mask properly. And he does that because he wants to get a Baby Yoda toy, of course. So where are we in time? We are here at the end of the verb phrase, and today we will move into, probably we will move into the noun phrase, or maybe we will just announce the topic and have a couple of slides on that. So when it comes to timing, we are on schedule when it comes to lectures. So we are here, the 3rd of December. We entered the final 4 weeks of the course. So it's like the last third of the course. When it comes to lectures, it's very likely that one of the final lectures, either on December the 17th or December the 24th, will actually be a practice class for everybody. I will send an invite and explanation by email. And the reason for that is that organizationally, we will be able to cover everything in lectures, but practice classes are a completely different story. So we will most likely, because our pace, we cannot speed up things in practice. It goes as fast as it goes. And normally we have 15 weeks. This year we have 11. So it has nothing to do with either you or me not trying hard enough. It's simply, you cannot squeeze more into 11 weeks than fits into 11 weeks. So we will most likely have to offset that and do key noun phrase exercises that do not fit into practice classes in lectures, probably on December the 24th or maybe December the 17th. We'll see. And before we switch to the lecture itself, I was completely blown away yesterday when I got this from Spotify. We didn't have Spotify before that, but they give you, if you're using it, they give you this Wrapped is finally here. And the song that it turns out is my favorite song is the song I was not aware I was listening to that much. Sandra from the 1980s. I don't get it, but okay, whatever Spotify says. So let's do the review. Last week we were really efficient, and we finished aspect and also last pieces of the voice. So we actually did 4 out of 5 verbal categories. So today we will only do modality. When it comes to last week's stuff, the important things for you are voice constraints, which you should be constantly be aware of, and the fact that you actually know everything about aspect, but you maybe didn't call all those different constructions their proper names. So this is not continuous, this is progressive. Simple is actually not simple, it means no progressive, no perfective. And then we said everything about the perfective, progressive, and the perfective, progressive aspect. That brings us to the topic for today. This is the real lecture, modality. Modality, if you remember from the intro class on the verb phrases, is something that allows you a grammatical category, or to be precise, a verbal category that allows you to modify the factual meaning of the verb, so that in addition to the basic meaning of the verb, you get additional notions such as the ones listed in blue: ability, permission, obligation. So if you just say John swims, it's a general statement about John and the activity of swimming. It's like habitual. John usually swims. If you add a modal verb like can, you get John can swim. And now it's not about, general John habitually swimming. It's about the fact that he's able to swim. If you have a different sentence and you add must, or even John must swim, then it's an obligation. Maybe he has a health condition and it's important for him to swim. John may swim, like he's allowed to swim. Maybe he had a condition, but now he recovered and he has the permission to start swimming. Or there's nothing that I can do with swim for the last one. He must have done a lot of research for his book. You actually deduce that this was the case. But all of this is, as you know, old stuff. We mentioned this. What we will do today is we will try to actually, explain why when you say she can drive, you can actually get, without the context, two meanings. You can get Danica Patrick, that's one of the best women drivers from the United States. She's retired now. Or you can refer to the lady on the right. So you cannot say that she can drive means the same for both photos, but actually both photos can be described as she can drive. But when it comes to Danica Patrick, it's the ability. She's really good at it. She has the ability to drive. She can drive, right? You pronounce it like that. She can drive, that's permission. She's allowed to drive. She has a driving license, but she probably would have crashed in Danica's car. Similarly, both of these photos can be described as the road may be blocked. So, for example, if you're watching a thriller, a movie, and the police officers are chasing down a fugitive, and they don't know how to stop him, for example, the fugitive stole a car, they can say, he's going down that road. Well, that road may be blocked, right? In the sense like it is possible to block the road. That road, so we will not cause complete chaos if we block that road to hunt down the fugitive. So it's possible to block that road. The road may be blocked. But for example, if you're driving yourself in a car and you hear on the radio, on a local radio station, there were landslides near, I don't know, Farmers Collective, then you can say to yourself, oh no, the road may be blocked, like, the landslide caused something to fall on the road. So it's possible that the road is blocked. So you see, without the context, modal verbs can express completely different meanings. She's able to drive, she has a permission to drive. It's possible to block the road, it's possible that the road is blocked. Similar, but completely different. What it means is that really we have a lot of work to do. But before that, because this is an intro course that prepares you for linguistic courses throughout the next 4 years, we have to also ask ourselves one other question, and that is, why do we really call it modality? Why do we use this word modal? What does it really mean for something to be modal? Modal as a term used to describe modal verbs comes from engineering, actually, believe it or not. Modality is about modulating the message. So physics is probably the last thing that you expected in linguistics, as you know, an introductory course in grammar and linguistics, but this is what it is about. So this is a sine wave. I'm terrible at producing sine waves, but it would be something like, you know, like that beeping sound you get from cheap toys, like beep. And then modulating means that you are changing the shape of that sound. So instead of boo, you get boo. So you change, for example, the pitch. It becomes higher. But fundamentally, it's still that sine wave, right? That's what modulation is. So John swims. That's this basic sine wave. Then you say John can swim. So it's still about John and swimming, but now you're adding this pitch in the sense of, let's say, ability. John may swim, now it's permission. So you can get multiple meanings, and the reason why we say modulation is underlying the term modality is that this is what we are doing with modal verbs. We are, you know, seemingly we are creating a chaotic thing that is not necessarily related to the original, let's say, underlying assumption, but that's really modality. You are just using modal verbs to alter the original meaning, but it's still there, just modulated. And this is, by the way, how synthesizers work. This is actually from a synthesizer wave. If you look really close, you can see the original sine wave in the background. So since this is an intro course, I have to tell you the general stuff that you also need to know for the oral exam in June, which most likely will be face-to-face because the news that we're getting is great. There'll be vaccines. All of this will be finished early next year, hopefully. So by June, probably we will be able to have face-to-face normal activities. So for the oral exam, you have to mention that although we are dealing with modality in the domain of the verb and the verb phrase, verbs are just one part of speech which can express modality. You can actually express modality through adverbs. For example, you know, instead of saying he may do the right thing, you can say he will possibly do the right thing. Or nouns, there's a possibility that he will do the right thing. Adjectives, it is possible that he will do the right thing. All of that fundamentally means he may do the right thing. So verbs are just the typical, let's say, parts of speech that is used to express modality. But modality, the modulation of meaning, that it's not just the fact that it's possibility, ability, permission, is also available through adverbs, nouns, and adjectives. So we will focus, of course, on the modal verb phrase because we are dealing with the verb phrases. In your workbook, there is no real, you know, discussion on everything that I've just told you, like what modality really means, why we call it modality, why it's not just a verbal category, why it's actually a general category. In your textbook, there's actually the second step behind this story, where it says that modality, and this is actually a subclassification of verbal modality, is expressed as either intrinsic or extrinsic modality. Intrinsic, which some people call deontic, these are fancy terms that I told you about, simply means that there's human control over events. And intrinsic modality is permission. If I tell you you may leave, That's intrinsic because I am a teacher and I'm in control, let's say, of the classroom, but we are now in a virtual classroom. Obligation, the police officer comes up to you and says, you must show me your ID card. That's within human control. The police officer has the right to do that. Ability, like I can type, I can, I can swim, I can drive, that's again within human control. And volition, I will do it, like you promise that you will do it, that's also intrinsic. Extrinsic is the opposite of that. There's no human control, there's only human judgment and guess what is likely to happen. So that's this thing like possibility. He may do the right thing. Necessity, we should water the plants because, they could die. Prediction, it will rain. All these things, we can predict them, but we are not in control, necessarily in control of them. He may do the right thing. He is in control, not me, right? Not the speaker. So when we talk about intrinsic modality, that's usually speaker's authority. So when we say human control, he may do the right thing is fundamentally within human control, so that possibility, but that's not the speaker's control. So when we say human control, most likely it's in most cases it's about the speaker's control. And when it comes to verbs that express modality, you already know them. There's a subgroup of auxiliary verbs called modal verbs. They indicate modal meaning. That's why we call them modal auxiliaries. And they are different from primary auxiliaries because they are always followed by the bare infinitive and they can never be used in isolation. So those are the features. We already mentioned them. Now we will just, fully classify them. You have to know this primarily for your final exam, the oral one in Grammar 2. So they appear only in the finite verb phrase. So they can never be non-finite. You cannot say to must. They can only be the first element of the verb phrase. So you cannot say have, must, been. You have to say must have been. They cannot occur in non-finite, but I already mentioned this in a way. And here this is actually exemplified. So it's not possible to say to may, is maying, has made, etc. So this is one feature. Another feature is that they are finite, but they actually lack some features of finite verb phrases. For example, modal verbs have no third person inflection. They always have the same form. They have no S form. So she must write is the same as I must write, but I like to write and she likes to write. You can get this S form. So they don't have it. Additionally, they have abnormal time reference. So both the past and the present forms of auxiliaries, modal auxiliaries, like let's say may and might, may refer to the present and the future. So I think he may retire next year. I think he might retire next year. So past tense of may is not necessarily used for the past of the possibility. The possibility can, the past form of the modal verb can refer to the future. Would you phone him tomorrow? It's just about, being very polite. With other verbs, non-modal verbs, this is completely impossible. You cannot say, I think he retired next May. Did you phone him tomorrow? So these are bone-chillingly wrong. And those auxiliaries are modal auxiliaries. They're called central modals because they are the ones that typically express modality. You know them: can, could, may, might, shall, should, will, would. these are the ones that have the present and the past forms, and there's another one which only has a single form, that's must. And what is also really interesting about them is that they have the contracted forms, just like typical auxiliaries. So must, must not, mustn't, can, cannot, or can't, will, will not, or won't, shall, shall not, or shan't, or shan't, depending on where you live. The same for should not, shouldn't, etc. The exception is may, right? May doesn't really have, I mean, you can find it, but very few people use it, mayn't. So because of all of this, we say that modal verbs are nice. What does nice mean? You will hear about it later throughout your studies, and that in one particular course in the third year, you will spend probably 2 weeks talking about nice properties. So these are the properties that be, have, and do as primary auxiliaries share with modal auxiliaries. So nice stands for negation without do, that's N. So all these verbs, primary and modal auxiliaries, can make negation without do support. Inversion without do is why we have I. So you can say must he go. You don't say do. Does he must go. That's terribly ungrammatical. C in I stands for clitics. So they can have these short forms: mustn't, can't, won't, etc. And E stands for ellipsis, but ellipsis without do. So when you say John likes cookies and you want to shorten the next sentence, you say so does Mary. But if you have a modal verb, you don't need do support. You can use the same modal verb. So I will try to do the best I can, and so will my colleague, right? You don't say, and so does my colleague will. That, again, is completely ungrammatical. So when you look at this, you can say, okay, but then why do we separate them from primary auxiliaries? Why do we insist that these modal verbs are, somehow different? What distinguishes them from primary auxiliaries is what we also mentioned in the previous slide. So unlike primary auxiliaries, modal ones do not have S form. They can never be non-finite form. And unlike primary auxiliaries, these ones cannot co-occur. And there's one thing which I failed to mention here. Primary auxiliaries can also work as lexical verbs. Modal auxiliaries can never be used as lexical verbs. So that's it for the modal verbs and why they are so different. What is really important from this is to remember that although what I mentioned, modal verbs have past tense and present tense forms, past tense forms do not really convey the past tense meaning. Very rarely, actually, they do that. In most cases, the difference between the present and the past modal verb is actually about in the degree. He may do it and he might do it is simply about a bigger or smaller possibility. Another thing which I didn't mention, but I will now, is that the modal verb phrase can express the modal verb phrase, so the one that contains the modal verb, can express the category of voice and the category of aspect, but not all combinations are possible. So the only, let's say, verbal category so far that we've seen that is really universal is actually the category of aspect. Aspect is compatible with everything. When it comes to voice, voice is not compatible with all voices and aspects. So here you have some examples. So The simple infinitive is okay in both the active and the passive voice. The police may question him tomorrow. He may be questioned tomorrow. The progressive infinitive is okay in the active voice, but the modal meaning plus the progressive aspect is not really possible. So actually I was wrong when I told you that that aspect is compatible with everything. It's actually more like that the voice can appears with everything. So the passive and the active voice are possible for both for all types of aspect, and they are possible for modal verbs, but some aspect combinations are not possible. So the police may be questioning him tomorrow is okay, but he may be being questioned at the moment sounds a bit weird. The perfect infinitive is again okay in the active voice and the passive voice, but the perfect progressive is only okay in the active voice. The police may have been questioning him for hours, whereas he may have been being questioned for hours sounds really, really weird. Again, grammatically, theoretically possible, but nobody would ever say that. And now, before we wrap up the whole section on modality, I just have to give you a couple of examples with some hints, because you will, in your midterm number 2, which I will show you in the second part of this class. So I have to tell you something about modal verbs, because you will have an exercise on modal verbs. So usually most students score more than 80% in that exercise, but for all of us to be on the same page, this has to be mentioned. So that we will go for typical modal meanings, and we will just list the verbs which can be used to express that. So when it comes to ability, it's of course typically expressed by which verb. Somebody can unmute him or herself. So which is the verb for ability by definition?
Can, could.
Can and could, and there's a semi-modal verb, be able to, which is also sometimes used. So the difference, so most of the time they are interchangeable, but not always. So this is what we sometimes actually test you on in the midterm. So these are some of the possibilities that you have here, and then we will discuss them. So can you hear the noise? I can't drive. I won't be able to do it. So they seem to be interchangeable. I could, or I was able to run very fast when I was a child. But of course, here you cannot say I can run very fast when I was a child. So here can is not available. And we were able to get tickets for the concert, but could and can't are not available. But we couldn't get tickets for the concert is okay. And I could not have lent you the money even if you begged me. So they are interchangeable in the first sentence set. Can you hear the noise? I can't drive. I wasn't able to do it, because this is natural or learned ability. So this is about a general natural or learned ability. So when you talk about this, like what you can generally do, then all these verbs are interchangeable. And that's why most people think that they are always interchangeable, but they are not. As you can see in the second sentence, I could, or I was able to run very fast when I was a child. This is the example where you see that sometimes there is a difference between the present and the past form of the modal verb, because when you talk about ability in the past, can, which is the present form of this verb, cannot be used. So for general ability in the past, you must use could or the past form of be able, was or were able to. But that's about general ability. So you could run very fast. When you talk about specific ability, then for the positive one, you actually are supposed to use only be able to. And for the negative one, you can use couldn't. So why we have this difference? Because be able to in the positive form is about specific ability. If you use could, that could be reinterpreted as general ability or even possibility. So that's the worst thing. So we were able to get tickets for the concert yesterday. We could get tickets for the concert yesterday. It could have this meaning could actually be like it was possible for us to get tickets for the concert yesterday. But if you are talking about ability, then only were able to or was able to is the right choice. But that's only for the positive ones. For negative ones, we couldn't get the tickets for the concert yesterday. This is clearly not possible to interpret it as possibility. It was more like ability in the past. We were not able to get those tickets. And the last one is ability in the past when action is not performed. So for that, you only use could. Be able to is not really available. And of course, can is only for the present ability or future ability. When it comes to permission, the most typical verb again would be which one? This time it's not can, it's most likely
May.
May, yes. But can, and this is the chaos with modal verbs, is also one of the most common verbs for permission. So may, might, can, could, and of course, just like you have be able to for ability, here you have a semi-modal construction, be allowed to. Again, I will show you a couple of sentences which will help us determine which ones are used in which context. So you can say, may I smoke in here? Can I smoke in here? Could I smoke in here? And very rarely, might I smoke in here? But when you look at sentences in the second set, on Sundays we could or we were allowed to stay up late, you wouldn't really be able to say on Sundays we may stay up late or on Sundays we might stay up late. And for specific instances, I had a visa, so I was allowed to cross the border, sorry. This is only be allowed to. So this is very similar to can, could, and be able to. So permission, general permission in the present and future, they are interchangeable. But when you talk about the past, again, you have the same rule, like for ability. Could and be allowed to are used for general permission, and only be allowed to is used for specific permission. There will be only one or maybe two tricky examples in the midterm. Most of them, there will be 5 modal constructions to be created there in the exercise of modal verbs. They will be more like general ones that you simply have to guess the suitable meaning of the modal verb. When it comes to obligation, obligation is, which verb would be obligation?
Must?
Must, yes. Must for strong obligation and should for, let's say, not so strong obligation. And of course, ought to, have to, needn't, and mustn't. So let's look at some examples. You should or you ought to study harder. You should ought to have helped her. You shouldn't, you oughtn't to have helped her. You must phone home at once. I have to pay my road tax soon. You needn't hurry. Tom doesn't have to pay his road tax. You needn't have watered the flowers because it's going to rain. I didn't have or I didn't need to translate it because he knows the language. So obviously there are some, let's say, differences in how we express obligation with these verbs in different contexts. So when we talk about present obligation or duty, we actually usually use should, and in British English you can hear ought to. You should study harder. When somebody tells you you must study harder, that's not this present obligation or duty. That's actually the third one, like you must phone home at once. What we have in the second part, he should or he ought to have helped her, but he didn't, or he shouldn't, he oughtn't have helped her, but that was a mistake. That's past unfulfilled obligation. So for present obligation, should and ought to. For past, should and ought to again. When somebody tells you you must study harder, that's no longer present obligation or duty, the general one, it's strong obligation or duty. So that's what we have in the third set. And of course, this is where the classification from your workbook comes to the forefront. You remember this thing about human control versus no human control. This is always relevant, and sometimes it's even more relevant who has the authority, the speaker or somebody who is not the speaker. So when the speaker has authority, you use must. That's why native speakers of English, when they are parents, tell their kids, you must study harder. They don't say, you have to study harder. If they say you have to study harder, that has a different meaning. That's like an external pressure to be a good student. I have to pay my road tax soon. That's like, it's not my authority, it's the government's authority that's forcing me to pay my taxes. When there's a lack of obligation, we either use needn't for speaker's authority or or have to for external authority. So you see, have to is actually generally used for external authority, whereas for a speaker's authority, if it's strong, it's must. If it's lack of strong obligation, then it's needn't, sorry, not need. Need is actually the need, right? It's not obligation. And for lack of obligation in the past, there's a big difference between need and have and did not need. So needn't have watered the flowers means that this person did not water the flowers. The flowers remain unwatered. The rain later watered them. But I didn't have to translate it means that you didn't translate it. Sorry, my bad. When you say I needn't have watered the flowers, means that you actually did water the flowers, but later on they received more water from the rain. So you performed it, but it was not necessary. So it was like you did something that was completely, useless because somebody else did it or something else did it. I didn't need to translate it means that you really did not spend 8 hours of your life translating something because it was not necessary. So sorry for this. I keep switching between windows and I didn't. Yeah, I was led by something that I was seeing as a section of the slide. When it comes to the possibility, what's there? So can is for ability, must is for obligation, may is for permission. What's the typical? Oh, sorry. Yeah, may is for permission usually, but what is for possibility? Is there a single one, or we use generally those that we already mentioned? Well, since you're silent, I'll tell you here there's no, like, typical one. We use all of those that we already mentioned. May, might, could, can are typical possibility modal verbs, and the difference in how they are used is again exemplified through these sets of sentences. So he may, might, or could be in the office now. The road may, might, could be blocked. These are all used interchangeably for present or future possibility. The only exception is she couldn't be driving the car, right? So past tense cannot be used for factual possibility that refers to the present progressive activity, because could has this past tense notion, and here the problem is that you have driving as a progressive activity, which is not really compatible with couldn't, with could, but it is with may. And when it comes to the road can be blocked or could be blocked, which is a theoretical possibility. So the road may be blocked means it's possible that the road is blocked. General possibility, the road can or could be blocked. This means it is possible to block the road. This is what we had in the intro slides. That's actually only can and could. You cannot use may and might for this one. So this is general possibility. So the difference between them becomes visible when you paraphrase them. So the present possibility is something like, it is possible that the road is blocked. General possibility is, it is possible to. So the difference between it's possible that and it's possible to. So that's if you need like an explanation on the difference in meaning, try to paraphrase it. The present or future possibility is always paraphrased with possible that. General possibility is paraphrased through it is possible to. The last one is, of course, like in all these examples so far, possibility in the past. He may, might, could, and here they are completely interchangeable. So we don't have the situation that we had with ability and permission and with obligation. Here they are completely interchangeable. And the last modal meaning that we will analyze in details is the meaning of deduction. Deduction, of course, you know from Sherlock Holmes and from the examples that I gave at the beginning, it's the same verb which we use for obligation. It's must, which is typically used. And there are only two, let's say, types of deduction. He must be at home now. He must have done a lot of research. That's positive deduction. And if there's positive, there's also negative deduction. He can't be hungry. He couldn't be hungry. She can't or she couldn't have moved the furniture all by herself. That's simply negative. There are other modal meanings in addition to the ones that we mentioned, and the ones that we mentioned so far are ability, permission, obligation, possibility, and now deduction. Other meanings which are not listed in your workbook, but they are in the slides, are something like habitual use. So for that you use either the modal verb would or a semi-modal used to. So past habitual states, I used to smoke, versus past habits, we would visit them every week. And also there's a meaning of assumption with will, should, ought to. Ring his number, he should be at home, and that's present assumption. The second one, the plane should have landed by now, past assumption. And of course you have future assumption, he will have plenty of time to get to the station. That's future assumption. So these are the modal meanings. So what you need to know is what we just actually went through, that the modal verb is a special kind of an auxiliary verb, different from primary auxiliaries because it doesn't have the third person. It cannot be used as a lexical verb. It only appears in the finite constructions, and it's not compatible with all combinations of aspect and voice, and the meanings, as we discussed, are separated into intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic, human control, the personal control of the situation by the speaker. Extrinsic, no personal control of the situation. That's the difference between you must work harder and that's like almost, a command, and extrinsic obligations such as we have to pay the utility bills because otherwise we will have legal issues. So as I mentioned, there are other forms of expressing modality, but we will really rush through that. So I mentioned that instead of verbs, sometimes you can use adverbs, uh, usually at the beginning of the sentence, something like maybe I forgot to close the window, which would be paraphrased as I may have forgotten to close the window. Sometimes adverbs that denote modality are inside the verb phrase. Jack is presumably going to the party, and you can do that with the verb will, but if you stress it, like Jack will go to the party, like that's the assumption there. And other modality adverbs are the ones that you use all the time. Certainly, maybe, which I mentioned, perhaps, possibly, actually, presumably, really, necessarily, hopefully. They are all actually markers of modality. Uh, and when it comes to nouns, nouns can also express modality. They are usually, but not always, followed by a that clause and two infinitives. So, for example, there is a slight possibility that you get the award. You might get the award. That would be the translation into the modal verb phrase. It is of utmost importance for them to win this match. They must win this match. From their perspective, it's from the speaker's point of view and authority, and from the point of view of the team players, this is internal, authority. But also it's deduction, because otherwise, for example, they don't go to the playoffs. So sometimes these meanings are combined. And on top of nouns, sometimes you have adjectives that act as modal markers. We actually use this when I tried to explain the difference between a present or future specific possibility and general possibility. When I paraphrase, the road may be blocked, and the road can be blocked. The road can be blocked in two different meanings. That it can mean either that it is possible to block the road, or it's possible that the road is blocked. So there we use the adjective possible. But of course, you can use the opposite. It is impossible to run 60 miles per hour, so one cannot run 60 miles per hour. And there are other ones, not only possible and impossible, but essential. For example, it is essential that you drink enough liquid. You must drink enough liquid. So possible, essential, crucial, and similar adjectives usually denote modal meanings. And with this, believe it or not, we just finished the fifth and the last of the verbal categories. And over the last 30 minutes of this class, I will show you the midterm. I will tell you something about the ideas, how to organize the midterm, and we will discuss this, and maybe, you know, we can have like kind of a vote on how to move forward with that. But before that, there are still 7 minutes before we reach the final 30 minutes, and that means that I have to tell you something that's actually related to all the verbal categories, and that's the interplay between, let's say, tense and modality and partially mood, and that's future time. So you remember, we don't have future tense. Future tense doesn't exist in most languages because there is no, and historically that's true for virtually all languages, there is no future tense inflection, and there is no neutral, colorless future tense form. What do we mean by colorless? Colorless means that it simply denotes future. In all languages, even those that have future tense inflections, when we talk about future, it's not neutral. It's not that you're God and you know what's going to happen in the future. Those expressions for the future actually always are speculative. So they are kind of a modal category. So that's why I mentioned that future time is a combination of tense, in the sense that you're using grammatical features to talk about location in time, but also modality, because you don't know what's going to happen, so you only can speculate, and mood, because you're not really giving facts, but you're not really wishful thinking. So there are, you are somewhere between indicative and subjunctive. You're in the domain of, you know, educated guesses. So in real life, something like this cartoon is not possible. You see, this guy got arrested because Madame Zaza sees all, even things in the future, and she called the police, says, I called them and told them what you were going to do tomorrow. Of course, that's not possible unless, you know, you use science fiction and imagination. You probably have seen this movie, and you know the scenes from this movie with Tom Hanks, sorry, not Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise, a different Tom. Of course, I'm talking about Minority Report. But even if you watch that movie, and I hope you have watched it because it's a good movie, directed by Steven Spielberg, you know that future is speculative. Even what this lady saw as a possible outcome didn't really materialize in the form in which she saw it. So it's constantly changing, the future, I mean. So it's uncertain, and that's why we say that it's the interplay of modality, tense, and mood. At this point, of course, comes the philosophical question. Then why, if you open some textbooks on English, you have something called the future simple tense? Well, the reason for this is that the future simple tense, which is will plus will or shall plus bare infinitive, is sometimes called the future simple tense because it usually is, you know, let's say it's the most common one that is used for this purpose of referring to the future, but it is not neutral and it's not colorless. And the reason why it's called future simple tense is because this was created by people who teach English as a foreign language, and they wanted to simplify and make things systematic, but not necessarily linguistically accurate all the time. And the reason why we do not call this in this course future simple tense, and no linguist will call it future simple tense, is that in addition to will and shall, there are other modals that can indicate future. So you can indicate future with be able to, be bound to, and even with full verbs like I hope, uh, it stops raining soon, I plan to finish this by the end of the day. This is all about future, but you're not using will or shall or anything. So here are some examples. The weather may improve, that's modal. But it's not what we would call the future simple tense. You must have dinner with us. It's again about future, but again, not will and shall. The project is bound to be a success, semi-auxiliary, and we plan to implement the project by the end of the year, full verb. So there are fundamentally 8 ways that you can express future time. So we don't have future tense, we have multiple means of expressing future time, 8 of them. Of course, will and shall, which most people call future tense, but it's not future tense. Be going to, the present progressive can be used for the future, the present simple, the future progressive, the future perfect, the future perfect progressive construction, and be about to. So I will really quickly, because the time is running out, I want to present the midterm. I will really quickly go through this. You know it, you just have to be able in June to present this in the oral exam. So if the crop fails, there will be a famine. I'll give you a lift to the airport. I will be there in half an hour. Will we help our friends? Shall we go to the cinema tonight? These are different ways that you use will and shall. So if the crop fails, there will be famine. That's a general prediction about the future, or facts that you think are absolutely certain for the future. So this, it's very unlikely that this will have a different outcome. I'll give you a lift to the airport is not about predictions. It's about spontaneous decisions for the immediate future. So you had other plans. You see this lady is in need of assistance. I'll give you a lift. And finally, sometimes it's not a prediction, it's not a spontaneous decision, it's actually general willingness. I will be there in half an hour, like I am willing to be there. Will we help our friends in the future? But that's fundamentally like, do we want to do that? And shall we go to the cinema tonight? Again, do we really want to do that? Unlike will, shall, and infinitive, going to future has a different, let's say, set of meanings, 2 of them. They are going to get married next year is one of them, and watch out that pile of boxes is going to fall. The first one, they're going to get married next year, is future fulfillment of a present intention. That means you have a strong intention, and unless something terrible happens to you, you will fulfill it in the future. So this is much stronger than we will get married next year. We will get married next year is like, I predicted, but I'm not so, I'm not so into marriage. We are going to get married next year. You really want to do that. So this is also how you measure the seriousness of a relationship in English, depending on the modal verb used to talk about future plans. Watch out that power box is going to fall. That has nothing to do with intention. We call this future result of a present cause, or simply deduction. So there's no intention. You just see that somebody placed the pile of boxes in a very weird position and didn't arrange it properly, so it's bound to fall. So you just deduce that the disaster is imminent, or this thing's going to blow. That's actually the same meaning. Like you see that, the timer is ticking down, in the movies. The present progressive, we talked about it, so no need to go through the details. We are meeting him at 3 tomorrow. That's an arrangement or a plan for the near future. The single, let's say, meaning. The simple present, we talked about it. What will you do if he offers you that job? School starts on September the 1st. So we discussed it when we discussed present simple. So that's time reference for the future in subordinate clauses, and timetables, schedules, and calendar events in the main clauses. Future progressive has two meanings. We didn't discuss this because this is will. That's a modal expression plus progressive verb. So we'll be seeing each other is one example, and this at 10 o'clock tomorrow I will be cleaning my flat. The first one is unplanned future. You know, an awkward situation at the end of the date. You don't want to move forward, and you say, I guess we'll be, I guess, seeing each other somewhere. And actually, you mean no way. The other one is this. I will be cleaning my flat at 10 o'clock tomorrow. That's completely the opposite. It's not unplanned. It's planned. You know that you are, you organize your schedule so that 10 o'clock tomorrow you will be vacuuming. The future perfect is the most interesting of them all. We will have moved to another flat by next Wednesday. That's a fancy and the only way to express that an action will have been completed by a future point of time. So if you are here now, this is now, there is next Wednesday, you are saying that sometimes between now and next Wednesday, this move to another flat will be finished. So somewhere here, that's future perfect, and the future perfect progressive is similar plus progressive meaning. By the end of next month, I will have been working for this company for 10 years. You usually need for and by phrases. So for some time, that's why you need for. Up to a point in future, that's why you need by. You will have finished something. So if it's now and this is end of next month, you're saying that since sometime in the future, now and over a small section of the future up to end of next month, you will have been working for this company. The last ones that are used for the future are be about plus infinitive. They are usually used for, let's say, 3 different meanings. We are to be married soon is future arrangement. We are to be back by 10 is future command. And if he's to succeed, he must work harder. Contingent future, that's actually conditional future. Contingent means there's a condition on which something else depends. So success depends on working harder. Be about to plus infinitive is similar, but that's only for immediate future. Near future is the simpler term, so imminent fulfillment. And with this, we actually finished modality. Now, I will switch to a different slide. There are some slides which I skipped, so because we are running out of time. So here it is, midterm exam number 2. We think that we can do it in January. If we cannot do it in January on a separate date, we can do it within the time slot for the written exam. So midterm exam. Sometime in January before the written exam. What is it about? So this one, the second one, is actually more valuable than the first one. Why? Because the first one was about basic concepts. This one is about a specific concept, and that's the verb phrase. And on top of that, the verb phrase is the most important phrase of them all, because you remember my animation that got me into trouble with YouTube, Loki being thrashed by Hulk, verb, and the verb phrase is like Hulk. It calls the shots. So it's worth 20%. So the midterm number 1 and midterm number 2 together, they are worth 30%. So that's the difference between getting, you know, like a 7 or a 10. 30 points is a lot. So you should try to, you know, take these midterms, unless you get sick or something else. Then, of course, you can let us know, and again, we can compensate for that somehow with, per use case basis. And this one is shorter than midterm number 1. It's got 7 tasks, and it only covers the second chapter. And although I now told you, no, it's like 20%, it's super important, it's actually not that difficult. The first task is something that I can easily make happen in the online learning platforms for exams. So this is not the task that is problematic for making this midterm online, but you will see there are tasks that are difficult to put online, which is why we will be doing it face-to-face. Supply the paradigm of the following verbs. So you get a verb such as put, and you write put, puts, put, putting, put. That's it. You will get 12 verbs. I don't think that we have to go through this, because you actually know this, we worked on this, and this is your general knowledge. So of these 12 verbs, 2 or 3 will be regular, 9 of them will be irregular, but to different degrees. Some of them will be regular, but there will be some spelling change, like regret with doubling of the T. Some of them will have a different spelling change, like panic. You will have to insert K. Some of them will be really irregular, like put, but they will be, you know, friendly irregular, like put, and some of them will be, let's say, unfriendly irregular, like let's say sing, sang, sung, or the irregular form of lie. Then the second task is actually the task because of which we probably cannot do this online. The second task is where everything that we discussed comes into play at the same time. Your task is to underline the verb phrases. So you find the verb phrases, you determine their type regarding structure and finite. So is it simple, is it complex, is it finite or non-finite? And then you identify the verbal categories expressed in each of them. In this exercise, you always get 4 verb phrases. So the first part of the task is to find the verb phrase, and then to say whether it's, you know, finite, non-finite, simple, complex, and to determine the category. So let's look at this sentence. This time tomorrow, he will have been working on that project for 5 days. The first verb phrase that you have there is will have been working. So will have been working is finite. It has a modal verb. It has a subject. All modal constructions are finite. And it's also complex because it has more than one auxiliary. It has actually more than just the head. It has at least one auxiliary. Now comes the part where everything that we've been talking about becomes relevant. So tense, present, or past. Is this present or past? Will have been working. Look at the modal verb. Will or would. Will is present, would is past. Will is present. So this would be the present tense. What about aspect? Is it plus progressive or minus progressive? In other words, does it express the progressive aspect? Well, you have ing, will have been working, so it's progressive. Is it perfective? So does it contain the auxiliary have plus past participle somewhere? Actually it does. It has have and been, so it's also perfective. Is it active or passive? Will have been working, not will have been being worked, so this is active. And the mood is indicative, right? We said the modality is not compatible with subjunctive and imperative, so as soon as you have a modal verb, it's indicative, and most of the time verb phrases are indicative. And finally, today we discuss modality in terms of verb phrases. This is actually, does the verb phrase contain a modal verb or not? So if there's a modal verb, it's modal. If there's no modal verb, it's not modal. And this is what you have to write. Everything that I just explained. Will have been working is finite and complex. Its tense is present. Its aspect is plus progressive and plus perfective. Minus progressive, minus perfective would mean no progressive and no perfective aspect. Voice is active, mood indicative, modality is there. So that's it. There's no other verb phrase there. This time tomorrow, he will have been working on that project for 5 days. That's actually the only verb phrase. You will have 4 verb phrases. This is the worst one that you can get, but the simplest one is something like, I want to go. So want will be one, to go would be another one, and they are both simple, and there are much fewer verbal categories. Don't worry, we will practice that. But before that, we'll practice that in practice classes, and I also have an example in these slides. But before that, let me show you other tasks. So the task number 3 is the complete opposite of number 2. It's something that you know very well. So we will again practice it in practice classes, but this is, you know, you don't need to prepare for this. This is fill in the gap exercise. And you are allowed to use all different tense and aspect combinations. So, you know, present simple, past simple, present perfect, past perfect, etc. Then you have task 4, which is about what we did today. Use a suitable modal. So you will have a sentence such as, he be home now. He must be home now. That's it. 5 sentences, 5 points. Test number 5 is what we practiced on Tuesday, the passive voice. Turn 7 sentences into the passive voice. John kissed Mary, Mary was kissed by John, but some of them will be more difficult. Something like Mary thinks that she's doing the right thing, and then it is thought that by her that she's doing the right thing, or something like that. Or Mary is thought to be doing the right thing. Test 6, the penultimate one, is again what we practice. This is about mood. When we practice subjunctive, you can use also modal past. So you will have some, I forgot, but 6, actually it's written 6 sentences. I think that we should go home, and then you have to paraphrase it using subjunctive or modal past and other hypothetical expressions. It's high time we went home. This is another reason why we cannot do it online, because this has to be graded manually. There are so many possibilities here that you simply cannot automate it. And the last one is, of course, something that will constantly be tested in this course and in other courses. You will get a sentence so that you don't forget the sentence analysis. You will have to label individual parts of speech, sentence elements, optional adverbials, which sentence element is which phrase, or a clause, type of verb. So we do it so that you don't forget this. It keeps you in shape. Exercise is crucial. So sentences will be quite simple. His determination, subject, surprise, verb, all the members of the board, object, MP, VP, NP. This is monotransitive verb, and you know, parts of speech are simple. That's determiner, noun, verb, predeterminate, determiner, noun, preposition, determiner, noun. So let me give you, before we stop, we can spend extra couple of minutes, some verbs which were used in task 1 last year. So as you can see, most of them are irregular, like teach, cast, strike, beat, forsake, seek, mow, but some of them are relatively common, like play, and irregular, but with spelling changes. But again, you know, play, refer, try, they are regular, just there will be some spelling issues there. Dig, of course, irregular, bet, and lie, be in a horizontal position. That, of course, is the irregular one. So additional information that I included here is actually the task number 2, which you see here for the first time. Don't worry, we have the same exercise in the workbook, 2 of them to be precise, and we will practice this in practice classes. But this is, for example, what you can get. This is from one of the previous midterms. Having completed a test flight with a nearly fatal engine failure, the chief test pilot gathered the engineers for a discussion, even though he was actually contemplating to kill them. So we can do it like this, but we don't have time. So, and also my screen is not working, so I will upload the key to this as a PDF. What I have animated is this. So the test pilot might have been frustrated, although to be honest, he should have been jumping in joy. So this was from a different midterm, and here you see this was not a pleasant one, so very few people got the first one right. Most people thought that the verb phrase was might have been frustrated, so I will try not to give you something like that. I apologize to that generation, and we will not repeat it, but this was like the worst case scenario. Frustrated is actually like an adjective, because you say the test pilot might have been really frustrated, very frustrated. This is not like the test pilot might have been killed. You cannot say might have been really killed or might have been very killed. So frustrated is an adjective. That was actually the biggest issue in this midterm. But when you get around, this might have been is finite and complex. So let me use my laser pointed. Might, finite and complex, and it's past because might is in the past. It's perfective because it contains have and participle, but it's not progressive. There's no ing. It's indicative. All modal verbs are automatically indicative. It's active. There is no be plus past participle unless you analyze frustrated wrongly, and it's plus modality because there's might. To be honest is a small clause where the verb phrase is to be. That's the simplest verb phrase you can get. You remember what we talked about verb phrases and finite, non-finite? We said non-finite verb phrases cannot express all verbal categories. So in the midterm, you hope that you will get as many non-finite phrases in this exercise as possible, because all non-finite verb phrases contain no tense, no mood, and no modality. So you only have to identify the voice and the aspect. And of course, you have to write that it's non-finite. To be is non-finite. All infinitives, ing participles, and ed participles, when they are the heads of phrases, are non-finite. So singing a tune is also non-finite. Singing a tune, he entered the room. Or let's say what could offended, or having been offended is also non-finite. Okay, so non-finite and simple because there's only one verb, and there is no aspect, minus perfective, minus progressive, and it's active because, you know, there's no be, there is be, but there's no past participle, so this cannot be passive. There's only one verb. The last one is should have been jumping. That's finite because it has a subject. Modal verb is always finite. Complex, more than one auxiliary. When you have a modal verb, you always base your analysis on the modal verb. So should is past, shall is present, therefore this is past. Have and participle, so it's perfective. Be and ing, been jumping, that's progressive. It has a modal verb. Modal verbs are only compatible with the indicative mood, so it's indicative, but also, you know, generally most sentences are indicative. The verb, main verb jumping, is not the participle, so it's active. The passive sentence should have been being jumped, which is impossible, by the way. And there is modality because there is should here. So that's actually the analysis. Don't worry if it looks complex, it's not, because your brain does this automatically every single time. This is the foundation of our communicative ability. All these categories are analyzed by your brain in an instant, and you fundamentally know this. So this is simply about doing it consciously, not only subconsciously. So next week we will start the NP, not continue. I suspected that we may not be able to start the noun phrase. In the meantime, expect a doodle to find the best date for our midterm, and tell your colleagues that if they are not attending these lectures, maybe they should next week, because we will have an interactive test run of the online midterm number 1. So we will be able to discuss it as we do it together, so that, you know, we are all on the same page and there are no technical issues and there is no doubt about how to do something in the online platform for the midterm, which I will pay this week, maybe today even. So that's it, the end of the lecture for today. I will stop the recording.